as I work on converting these Bladeguard Veterans into a unit for my custom chapter, the Hollow Choir. In the last video, I created the protectors for the chapter master, the Canticle Guard. These Blade Guards are becoming the protectors for the field Cantors, or lesser chaplains, known as Psalm Wardens. This was the most involved conversion so far, as they did not already have the robes that come with the Dark Angel specific sculpts. But before I got to the heavy sculpting, I started with the same battle damage I've been giving all the models. I removed all the Imperium icons or purity seals, first with my nippers and then with an X-Acto knife and filing sticks, and then began adding some damage to the armor panels. I like to add small triangle nicks on the edges at random with an X-Acto knife, and then I pull out the pin vise using a combination of shallow holes to create corrosive pockmarks, and then deeper holes for penetration wounds. I then go back with the X-Acto to make those uniform edges a little bit more ragged, as well as add any deep gouges using the full length of the blade and deep pressure. On these models where the swords are very prevalent, I try to take my time with the battle damage there, trying to add a combination of shallow dings as well as a few deep chips with that X-Acto blade, and I try my best to make it a little bit less uniform, a little bit more random, especially between models so they're not all matching. These Bladeguard veteran sculpts have those like really pristine and decorative halos. So I went ahead and took off all the like sun rays from those halos, added that same battle damage I've been doing, and kind of cut out a random little piece so it looks like a really corroded and decayed version of the normal halo. I really love the design that's on these shields, so I wanted to try and maintain it, especially that part with all the skulls. But the idea was to try and sculpt something that matches my custom logo for the chapter. So I needed to remove the kind of hilt pieces of that sword and then added the same battle damage. But I'll go back to designing that later. But when I started my sculpting, it was all about the robes and hoods that I wanted to add to these characters. So I started with just a blob kind of in the neck hole and then pressing the heads into it in the direction I want them to be so that I could kind of force that cowl a little bit easier. And then I tried my hardest to roll out this green stuff, but still trying to figure out all the process and not get too frustrated. But kind of cut out a triangular piece to put over as the cape, and then added the power pack to it, and then took a smaller flat piece to connect to that cape and make into the hoods for each of these individual models. At this point, I wasn't too worried about adding texture. I was just trying to smooth out any fingerprints or any ridges between the two. I did try to add some folds at this point, but I wasn't having the best luck. But I let it dry a little bit more when it was a little bit less sticky. And I was able to add some folds. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't feel like I was too successful with that on this project as a whole. I try to kind of go back and add more texture once everything's dry with both a Dremel and a scalpel, as you'll see later. But this was really my first full attempt at adding any type of cloth to a model with green stuff. But here's that logo that I was trying to mimic with the shields. So my first idea was to try and do it with green stuff, and that failed. So I found some big bone pieces from Flesheater court boxes and glued them on to mimic that bone wing. But I did try to make a kind of halo, as you saw in that logo, with green stuff. Once again, that kind of failed. So I wanted to add that area with more drapery and robes like they have on one of the sculpts. They kind of have like a drapery over their sword. And then I went back with that green stuff and tried to add some ropes or chains around those bones. So it didn't look like they were just floating, but instead they were actually connected. And then, like I said, pulled out the Dremel to really take out, once again, any fingerprints or any just too smooth texture that didn't make sense for this really kind of ragged, penitent robes. And then I went back with kind of the same technique that I used for the plastic parts with the scalpel, with the pin vise, to add in that wear and tear on the robes, just like I do on the armor. Something that I didn't have footage of, or at least I couldn't find, is me adding some bits from both the dead animal box, especially like on the belt where I cut off some of those Imperium icons like femurs and some antlers. You could tell in this model underneath the pistol there's like a little chain from a Battle Sisters kit. I swear I videoed this, I just can't find it. As you can tell, there's those Inner Circle champions in the background. I did all these first models in a big batch, and I'm just going back and editing the footage afterwards. Everything kind of from this point on I did as individual projects, so it's a little bit more organized and a little bit more of a plan when it comes to that sculpting. A big piece that I did in video is that I took some rib cage pieces from the Dead Animal Bits box and I glued it onto the chest instead of sculpting any icons. So that was really the only kind of unique thing that I did. Everything else was just kind of random adding a little bit of flavor, just as I'm doing here to add to the bases. Skulls, bones, random plastic pieces in my drawer to act like debris, and then added it to this stone and mud texture. Doesn't look like much here. It looks fine once I paint it and add pigment powders. But once I was done with that, I primed it up that same black brown I've been doing. No time to paint. I'm going to paint all of these things in a big batch, and then going forward, I'll do sculpting and painting in one video. But yeah, here's those final products. Pretty happy with them, but thanks for watching.